It's my pleasure to introduce Sir Helen ALFORD, who is member of the Congregation of St. Catherine. She's president of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. Yes, it's better like that? Okay. The second one like that? Okay, so it's my pleasure to welcome Sister Helen ALFORD, who is a member of the Congregation of St. Catherine. She's president of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, vice rector of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas. She's also expert of the Holy See's Agency for Evaluation, the APEPRO, which is very well known. And she's also consultant to the Dicastery for the Promotion of Integral Human Development. And her topic is very important. It's about the Catholic tradition that have been already mentioned this morning, but the Catholic tradition as a source of innovation in research. So it's probably at the heart of our reflection during these 2 days. And I thank you very much, Catherine, for your presence, Helen, for your presence among us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francois, for this kind introduction. And I have to say, first, it's such a great honor for me to be with you and to see you sitting in front of me now it's quite moving for me, because it makes me think about all that I've gained from my contacts with the Catholic universities around the world over the years. And so I'd like to begin by thanking you for all that I have received from the various universities with which I've been in contact, and also for all that you have given to the broader society. I think it's providential that we celebrate the 100th anniversary of IFCU this year, not 25 years ago, not 25 years from now. For it is at this moment in history, with its profound experience of a poly-crisis in all its intricate dimensions, that the contribution of Catholic universities through their teaching and outreach, but especially through their research, is uniquely important. Now, I'm saying this as a neophyte president of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, appointed, I might say, on April the 1st, which I think is a perfect day to be appointed to that position. Now, this academy is only 30 years old, so it's a little child compared to IFCU. And I would like to use this chance to address you, to talk about how we could work together for the good of this broken world around us. So this means I will speak most directly about research in the field of social sciences, but that will still allow me to make connections with the natural sciences and engineering and technology, remembering what Laudato Si says rightly about our crisis. We are not faced with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. That's number 139. This also allows me to say that the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences is working ever more closely now with the Academy of Sciences, which is our bigger, older brother, founded before we were. So it allows me to make connections with engineering, science, and technology, but also with theology, philosophy, and the humanities more generally, since the crisis we face requires us to rethink the foundations of our modern system, of which the social sciences are children. So we are part of the modern system. We need to rethink our foundations. And for that, we will need to draw on the resources of our theological and philosophical tradition. Or to put it as John Paul II does in his encyclical Centesimus Annus, I had to quote Centesimus Annus at the 100th anniversary conference of IFCU. So as John Paul puts it in Centesimus Annus, the theological dimension is needed, both for interpreting and solving present-day problems in human society, interpreting and solving our problems. So, with those few introductory words, let's look at our title. The first part of it is a phrase from the Gospel of Matthew, which comes also at a critical juncture in the Gospel story, as the attitude towards Jesus on the part of his hearers is starting to change, moving from one of amazement and expectation to one of doubt, criticism, and overt hostility, as one of the scholars puts it, and in which the inner group of disciples becomes more important as the bearers into the future of his message in the face of this rising opposition. So this little phrase that we have, bringing out of our storeroom treasures new and old, comes at the end of what the scholars call the third major discourse, which is basically the 13th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, including its 7 parables of the word or the kingdom of heaven, the parable of the sower, the parable of the wheat and tares, the mustard seed, the leaven in the dough, the buried treasure, the pearl of great price, and the fish net or the dragnet. 7 parables. Now, many of these parables focus on the littleness of the word or of the kingdom of heaven. It is a little seed sown. Indeed, it is the tiniest of all seeds. It must compete with the tares. It is hidden like yeast in the dough. It is buried, even if it is treasure. And it's one pearl, even if very valuable, among the many. Now, we could carry on examining this text, but I think we can already see many parallels to the situation of research in the Catholic University of today. Just give you some examples. Christianity is facing rising hostility in the part of the world where it is most established and where many of our universities are to be found. What we have to offer seems pretty small in the face of today's challenges. And perhaps, like the inner group of disciples, the Catholic universities, as bearers of the intellectual tradition of the Church, are going to become more central to the Church's mission in the future. Now, this text, just to finish these comments on that text, this text is also used in the opening paragraphs of the encyclical we just mentioned from John Paul, Centesimus Annus, referring back to Rerum Novarum and the new things that could be gained from reflecting on it 100 years later. I quote the Pope, "The treasure is the great outpouring of the Church's tradition, which contains what is old," he puts in inverted commas, "received and passed on from the very beginning, and which enables us to interpret," inverted commas, "the new things in the midst of which the life of the Church and the world unfolds." And he uses this same text also in Ex Corde Ecclesiae, the apostolic exhortation on Catholic universities, and I quote this text too. "By research and teaching, Catholic universities assist the Church in the manner most appropriate to modern times to find cultural treasures, both old and new, nova et vetera, according to the words of Jesus." That's number 12. So, in the light of that brief reflection on the biblical text, which seems to be especially connected to Catholic universities and to a centenary celebration, let us turn to the question of our research, using the second part of our title as the guide for this, the Catholic tradition as a source of innovation in research. Now, I'd like to make 3 points under this part. Firstly, we could start looking at this question historically. Can we see anywhere where the Catholic tradition has been ahead of later research results, showing that it could be a source of innovation. Now, I think we could find lots of examples of this, but to be brief, I just give you one example, which can be found in the inaugural lecture given by Giuseppe Toniolo. We're in Italy, so it's good to have an Italian example. Giuseppe Toniolo, when he took up the chair of economics at the University of Padua in 1873. So we're talking about a lecture 150 years ago now. Now, looking at this lecture, we can see that it anticipates empirical research results that we were only able to obtain much later. His lecture, which looks at ethics as an intrinsic factor in economics, points out that mainstream economic theory starts from an inadequate view of the human person, on the basis of which he can say, and I quote him, "There arose a system of economic doctrines which, resting on a defective analysis of human nature, placed in private profit the only motive, the norm and the sanction of human action, the key to all economic facts." He goes on, therefore, to identify 3 groups of factors that also influence economic outcomes, describing them in this way. These and other sentiments, I'll say what they are in a moment, these and other sentiments which, together with the spirit of self-interest, have the same root in our souls, just as they necessarily influence the whole of man's activity, so they affect every social economic fact, which must therefore be considered as the resultant of a bundle of component forces, in the context of which personal gain acts under the modifying influence of all the other impulsive causes. So let's look briefly at these 3 groups of factors in relation to the areas of research that are now producing results confirming the philosophically based assertions he was already making 150 years ago. Now, the first set of factors he puts under the general heading, the religious spirit, one of which is the feeling of honesty and fairness, I'm quoting him here, which, in proposing a higher purpose to man's activity, informs and colors all its manifestations, and none is exempt from its influences. Now, today, we know from the results in the field of game theory, such as the results of the ultimatum game, that people do act in economic transactions out of a sense of honesty and fairness, doing so freely and without any constraint to do so from the law, and often taking a penalty in terms of immediate economic gain by doing that. Now, the second group of factors, they are organized around what he calls the consciousness of one's own moral dignity, an impulse, he says, that in the individual often outweighs that of material interest. Now, here we could refer to the results from other work in the field of behavioral economics, some of which has been popularized by Dan Pink in his book, Drive, showing that giving people economic incentives at work, except in very limited circumstances, tends to reduce their effectiveness, while chances to exercise autonomy and mastery, which we could see as linked to the consciousness of one's own moral dignity, as Toniolo says it, have far greater positive effects. Thirdly, he talks about what he calls the most noble need for sociality, with its manifold impulses. Now, here, among the many empirical results that we could mention, perhaps the most impressive is the great volume of work now available on happiness. The World Happiness Reports show that across the world, and therefore in a culturally independent way, or we could say below the level of culture, at the level of human being as such, When we are at low levels of income increases happiness, which could be seen as consistent with a self-interested way, a view of economic motivation. But above a fairly low income level, increases in income no longer correlate in a straightforward way with increases in happiness. And the factor that correlates much better with increases in happiness is, as Toniolo predicted, rather the quality of one's relationships. So overall then, Toniolo's lecture gives us just one example of how Catholic thought can be ahead of research results and could illuminate the way forward along new and innovative lines of research. So with this in mind, I want to move to my second point. Is there something from our tradition that could illuminate us now, helping us to deal with the polycrisis that we mentioned already? If the Catholic universities could help the world deal with this, we would be making a decisive contribution, one very much in line with the pontificate of Pope Francis. I think one way to address this is to look at how Catholic intellectuals reacted to the nearest crisis to the one we are in now. We're talking, of course, about the crisis of the 1920s and 30s. That is, at the time when IFCU was founded 100 years ago, when democracy and liberalism seemed to be collapsing, Wall Street collapse amongst many other problems, and authoritarianism seemed to be going from strength to strength. Catholic thinkers like Jacques Maritain, Emmanuel Mounier, and Gabriel Marcel, among many others, developed in the face of this the idea or the movement or the approach, there are various words for it, called personalism. In the face of the collapsing world order around them, they focused on the question, who is man, or who is the human being? Identifying in the individualism of modern liberal thought the underlying problem that needed to be confronted. Let's not forget that it is individualism which also opens the door to the collectivism of totalitarian systems like communism and fascism. Now, looking back, we could say that the personalism they started developing then, and which they were able to take so far, but which now needs further development by us, if it is to have a decisive impact, we could see it as a kind of pilot project, I would say, for dealing with the crisis that we are in now. For in some ways, personalism had great success and influence. It was the main inspiration behind Christian democracy, which came to the fore in Europe after the totalitarian systems had been overcome, and was the major political force in Europe during the period that in good English language we call the Trente Glorieuses, the 30 wonderful years after the war, which is the only phase in history that we know of in which there was fast economic growth and low inequality, much lower inequality than we have now. At the same time, however, Christian democracy also demonstrated its weaknesses. And in particular, it was not able to resist the onslaught of neoclassical economic thinking in the Thatcher-Reagan revolution from the 1980s onwards. Now, I would suggest that this was at least in part because, although personalism had found how to influence political thought, there was no personalist economics that could have functioned as an effective counter to neoliberal economics. There is nothing to say, however, that such a personalist economics could not be developed. Indeed, I think it's one of the very things we should try to do in the face of our crisis. For there is an argument to say that the problems we face now are not only of a similar kind to those faced by the personalists in the 20s and 30s of the last century, but in some real ways are even more profound than theirs. Our problems are even more profound than theirs, demonstrated not least by the climate crisis. Furthermore, it is even clearer now than it was then that the fundamental problems we face, those that are at the root of our crisis, are largely social and systemic, and that the individualistic mindset that we have inherited from modernity is too narrow and inadequate to help us find solutions to these problems. We need a new philosophical and theological framework, one that builds on modernity in the sense that it still gives great importance to human freedom as modernity has done, but which allows us to go beyond the collective action problems we are constantly facing because of our individualistic way of seeing the world, and to recognize that we have shared objectives and shared goals that we can pursue together, building genuine common goods between us, and from which each of us can also obtain the individual goods we need. We need to find a new equilibrium between the exercise of personal freedom and the achievement of shared goods. And personalism has the potential to help us with that. Now, at this point, let me mention that the Academy of Social Science has an upcoming meeting on the social ontology of Thomas Aquinas in dialogue with the social sciences to help advance thinking along these lines. And I am sure that lots of people will come to me after this talk and say, we are doing this and we are doing that. I'm sure there's many other initiatives happening in the Catholic universities now. So let's try to find a way to build our contribution together in solidarity, creating a common good between us, one which is shared as much as possible with the wider university sector. And now my third and last point, which refers to what we can offer to the church in our context. As universities, our first duty is to share and advance knowledge in our various intellectual disciplines, which is good for society as a whole and for the church as part of society. But we also have a particular responsibility to the church to contribute to strengthening her and her mission. In speaking of the nature and mission of the Catholic University in Ex Cordia Ecclesiae, Pope John Paul II cites a text which, it says in the footnote, is from a meeting of Catholic universities in 1972, which I assume was an IFCU-sponsored meeting, although the footnote doesn't actually say who was sponsoring the meeting. Anyway, the fourth point in this cited text runs as follows, that Catholic universities have an institutional commitment to the service of the people of God and of the human family in their pilgrimage to the transcendent goal which gives meaning to life. Now, surely there are many ways we can realize this part of our nature and identity. In my comments, however, I would like to focus on what we can do as universities in a way that connects to what we're doing in the Academy of Social Sciences. So on this front, I think a key contribution we can make to the church is to help her become more data literate. Not being able to use data in our day is like not being able to read, hence the term data literacy. And just as the early church thinkers used the leading language, if we can put it like this, they found around them, meaning Greek philosophy and Roman legal and moral thought. So we need to be able to use and speak the key language of the modern world, the language of data, and translate into it what the church has to offer the world. Now, firstly, we need to do this for internal reasons. We need to be able to manage our institutions as well as possible. And in order to do that, we need to be able to evaluate where we are and set targets for where we want to go so we can improve. Which inevitably brings us to the question of measurement. Now, those of you who are administrators in Catholic universities, perhaps the majority of people here today, will not need any convincing about the need for measurement, even if you will also be aware that measurement can be used badly. We know that we need to live in the tension between two phrases, both of which are true. If it isn't counted, it doesn't count. And the things that really count can't be counted. We live in this tension. We know what happens to research when an unintelligent use of journal impact factors, research evaluation programs, and university league tables ends up putting academics in impossible situations where they resort to unethical means to achieve the unrealistic publication targets that have been imposed on them. And IFCU, I have to say, is to be commended for the intelligent use it is making of its Newman evaluation system, helping Catholic universities to measure and improve their social responsibility without creating this kind of unhealthy competition, tending as it does towards corruption and fostering plagiarism. Nevertheless, within the wider church, I think we have the opposite problem. I have been told by theologians and philosophers in my university, you can't measure love, or you can't measure virtues. Now, my answer to this statement is, yes, you are right. We can't measure love, we can't measure virtue. But we also can't measure what a student has learnt in our courses either. So if we adopt this line, we really shouldn't have exams either, since we know that they don't measure what a student has really learnt. So this example shows us that the point of measurement is really very modest. It is not to make an absolute evaluation of the way things are, but rather to help us improve step by step, like a walking stick helps a person with a bad leg move forward, allowing us to move from where we are now to something better. And just as we change the way we evaluate students, we can give them coursework to do, rather than evaluating them only on a final exam, so we can change and improve the measures we use to evaluate how we are running a parish, or how we are running a diocese, or, dare I say it here, how the Roman Curia is run. However, I want to say that the question of data literacy is not so important as regards the internal management of the church or church institutions, as it is with regard to the external mission of the church and her work of evangelization and promoting integral human development. That's where I think data literacy is really important. Or to use the kind of language we often hear today, we need to be able to tell our story better. Now, this is crucial for our work for human development, especially in developing countries. And in a similar way, it is crucial for evangelization, especially in rich and secure countries. Now, I think the simplest way to say this is to go out onto the average street in any capital city or onto the average campus of any state university and ask the first person you meet, stop them and say, if you hear the words Catholic Church, what do you think about? What comes into your mind? Well, I think, at least in some places, they'd probably say paedophilia. They might say financial corruption, especially if they're in London. And they might say holding back progress, especially of women, something like this. They might also say something about Pope Francis. Okay, that's also true. But they could also be saying the biggest provider of education in sub-Saharan Africa, the most global education system in the world, one of the major providers of AIDS care, and we could just go on doing this. I remember also another little story to tell you, that just after Pope Francis had been elected, literally it was a few days afterwards, some non-Catholic people said to me, Pope Francis has revolutionized the Catholic Church. I said, he hasn't revolutionized anything. I mean, he hasn't even had the chance to do it yet. What he is doing is making visible to you a face of the Catholic Church you never saw before. You didn't see it, and you didn't think it existed, but it did. We need to make sure that people can see all those faces of the Catholic Church. And one way to do it, one way in which the Catholic universities can play a crucial role, is by telling our story using data. And I just want to give two concluding examples, one already existing, one that could be developed. So the already existing example is the very good Global Catholic Education Reports. There's 4 of them so far, and the Global Integral Human Development Report, which are available in a project which IFCU is supporting along with other international Catholic education offices on a website called globalcatholiceducation.org. As far as I know, there's one guy who's behind these reports, Quentin Wooden, who's now working for UNESCO, and he's using data which the Vatican Statistical Office has been collecting anyway. It's no new data that he's collected. He's just presenting it in a really effective way. Now, I have already been able to use these reports to support the British Embassy to the Holy See in its efforts to get the UK government to work much more with Catholic education and Catholic healthcare in its overseas development aid programs, especially in relation to the most vulnerable, or what's often called fragile states. I am sure that there are many, many other interesting examples like this. Perhaps I could say in this week of prayer for Christian unity, which started today, I could show how ecumenical I am by highlighting an example from a Jesuit university. The Fordham Francis Index is a great example of this kind of thinking. They took the talk which Pope Francis gave in the General Assembly of the United Nations and turned it into, all the things he said, turned them into a composite measure of human development. So these are things that are already existing. I'm sure you've got lots of other interesting examples out there. But there's some other things we could do. For instance, let's talk about somewhere where the rubber really hits the road. Discussion about financial support to the church, which is a very key issue in European countries, for instance. There are often debates about this in the current situation. I understand right now there's a discussion going on in Poland about the church fund there, and especially about whether it should continue to support Polish missionaries around the world. Now, if we had data on what those funds that the Polish government is providing to the church in Poland, if we had data on what those funds invested in missionaries actually achieve, especially if we could produce this data in a form that could be compared to similar investments in equivalent types of activity or actor, we could change the discussion about the church. It no longer becomes, I'm in favor of the church or I'm against the church. It becomes, what is actually being done with these resources? How much are these various actors contributing to human development? We could focus the discussion on what we are contributing, or, as in this case, on what potential contribution would be lost if funding was removed. So on this point, let me say that the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences has an upcoming meeting on measurement organized with the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, led by one of our academicians, Sabina Alkire. It's going to be on measuring integral human development from the bottom up, which will be involving Catholic aid agencies and missionaries on the ground in a discussion with some of the leading thinkers in the field to come up with better measures that can really support what Catholic actors and others are doing to promote integral human development. Maybe I can just mention some other upcoming past meetings. We're going to have one on creating a culture of inclusion for persons with disabilities, thinking about the fact that 2 years from now, it will be 20-year anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We're going to have a climate resilience summit, which will involve mayors and regional governors, debt distress meeting on the Global South, international taxation, a meeting to prepare the UN summit on the future. We've got ongoing meetings on building a fraternal and sustainable economy. All these sorts of things are going on, just so you know about them. So I should conclude. I would like to return to what I said at the beginning. I think it's providential that we have this 100th anniversary conference now. For I think in the next 100 years, IFCU and the Catholic University sector could play, and probably will play, a really crucial role in helping the wider society to face its crises. I think we could see the last 100 years, the first 100 years of IFCU's existence, as laying the groundwork, or as having run a pilot project for what is to come. For, as the Toniolo lecture and the work of the personalists show, the key inputs we will need in the future can already be found, at least in nuce, in our past. And what we need to do is what the Matthean text indicates to us: bring out of our storeroom treasures new and old. Doing this, we could make some really decisive contributions, both to resolving the social and systemic crises the world faces and to supporting the evangelizing mission of the Church in the world, telling her story in a new way. We could even imagine that by 2050, say, the average person on the street that we talked about, if they're stopped and asked, what do you think of when you hear the words Catholic Church, might think, leading social innovator in the world. Why not? We could change the story like this. I think, too, that if we can work together between the Pontifical Academies and IFCU and the participating institutions, participating universities, we could make a key contribution to all of this. And I look forward to be able to trying to build that relation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sister ALFORD. One, thank you for your very inspiring speech. Maybe we can take 1-2 questions, take 5 minutes to maybe ask a question to Sister Helen, or just to make a remark, an observation about what we have listened. And so can we have a mic just in front?
Good afternoon, Sister. My name is Fernando Sanchez, a Rector of the Catholic University of Costa Rica, and IFCU Vice President. Just wanted to tell you that, adding to your examples, we have developed with ODUCAL, the Organization of Latin American and Caribbean Universities, and also with IFCU support, an index based on Laudato Si, with 80 variables where we can measure whether a country is close to what the Pope is saying or not. And it's as your complete disposition. We're ready to collaborate in any way possible.
Thank you so much. I'm no surprise that Latin America is doing that kind of work. That's great.
Well, it's just a very brief comment first to thank you for your talk, and to say that it is truly incredible for us all sitting in this room to be able to engage in a new partnership with the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. This is something that I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues and the collective of universities that we've been meaning to strengthen and work together. And there's so much, as you said, that Catholic universities can do, and that we can do learning from you as well, and that together we can contribute and solve the complexity of problems that the world is faced with. So your talk is very inspirational for us all, and we'll look forward to being the mediators in this process, because this is what the Federation is all about. Thank you.
One last comment or question? Yes, on the left side.
Thank you very much. I'm Judith Gruber. I'm representing KU Leuven, and I'm speaking as a systematic theologian here. And I'm very grateful for the vision you presented. And I think it's really crucial to the work of the Church as it intersects with the university. I think you spoke very strongly to the use of data, also to the necessity to find criteria. How do we measure church? And I wonder what you think of perhaps the question, once we have defined this criteria, do we perhaps, and go to the work of finding this data, do we find different ways of how the church is in the world, of where we find the church? Perhaps in ways that we find the criteria that we have defined as ecclesial, human dignity, for example, that we don't just find them in spaces that we define as Catholic, but elsewhere. And the spaces that we do define as Catholic, we don't find these criteria. So once we take that approach, maybe we have to reverse the gaze and ask us again, also as Catholic universities, what does it mean to be Catholic? Is our mission, our identity actually as clear as we believe it is in view to the world? Or do we have to really ask us again, what do we actually stand for? And can we ever have a clear answer to that?
Yes, I think it's a very important point. I think I tried to say that when we use measures, they are about helping us to improve. That implies that we're not doing everything as well as we could. Yeah. So we will find problems, and that's good, because in the end, we need to improve. And we get beyond often, unfortunately, I think sometimes in the church we can have people feeling they are not treated very well, that somebody doesn't like them, that there's a lot of personal tensions between people. And if we can try to focus a bit more on some kind of measures, we help to deal with these personal tensions. And often we should not see some things as personal problems, but they're actually objective problems that we're having. So I think it can only, if we do it properly, we can do it badly. Of course, we have lots of examples in the world today about doing this badly. So there's no surety that we're going to do it well. But if we can try to do it as well as possible, we hopefully will help ourselves. But as you say, we also need to help wider society with this. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much once again, Sister ALFORD. And of course, as the speech and the different intervention we have listened since today morning, after the meeting you will be able to download and receive this text, speech and talking points of our different speakers. So what we propose, thank you once again. Will give the floor to Dr. Fernando Sanchez Campos, that will give some introduction words regarding the topic of this roundtable, and then when Father Jenkins will be connected, we can continue with the discussion.
Great, good afternoon, everybody. I was happy that our roundtable was after the coffee break, but I'm sure that with the quality of our speakers and with the topic we're going to tackle, nobody's going to fall asleep. I'm sure about that. So we're going to talk about IFCU, a legacy of academic diplomacy and societal engagement. FIUC, un legado de diplomacia académica y compromiso social. Last May, during the celebration of the 70th anniversary of ODUCAL, la Organización de Universidades Católicas de América Latina y el Caribe, Pope Francis delivered, as always, a direct and deep, sound speech. Even if intended for Catholic universities in Latin America and the Caribbean, as far as I understand, it appeals to all Catholic universities in the world, and hence to IFCU. Let me quote in Spanish, though, as the document was not translated by the Holy See, what I consider is the center or the heart of his message. Abro comillas. Una universidad católica debe ser misionera, es decir, con las puertas hacia afuera. Quizás la misión de la universidad es formar poetas sociales, hombres y mujeres que aprendiendo bien la gramática y el vocabulario de la humanidad, tienen chispa, tienen el destello que permite imaginar lo inédito. Imaginar lo inédito. No se olviden de esta expresión, formar poetas sociales. Quizás la misión de la universidad es preparar coreógrafos sociales, hombres y mujeres que vislumbren en el pueblo una danza, un baile, donde cada uno contribuye a la gracia del movimiento total y nadie es excluido. So, social poets and social choreographers. That's what he's asking us to do, to educate in the universities. And this is absolutely and completely in line with what Cardinal Tolentino mentioned today morning. We not only need creative intelligence, but collective intelligence. It is clear to me that universities from all the regional groups represented at IFCU have been educating social poets, or even better, social choreographers, or sound leaders working for social progress and harmonic, sustainable development for 100 years now. Therefore, with this mission in mind, and in terms of this conference in general, and the present roundtable specifically, the central question to be asked at the beginning of the celebration of our centenary as a federation is, what can we learn from our past that can be applied at the present and even enhanced in the future as a federation? Or should I say, as a federation of federations, with all the cultural diversity we represent, with challenges that need to be faced at the local, the regional, and the global levels, and conflicts which, even if international in scope, have a growing national impact. To discuss these central issues, we have a roundtable integrated by a very distinguished group of scholars, 3 of them representing founding universities of IFCU and 1 former president of our federation. Professor Franco ANELLI, Rector of the Catholic University of Sacred Heart, Sacro, Cuore, Italia. Reverend John JENKINS, President of the University of Notre Dame, United States of America, that, as mentioned by Nicola, will be delivering his presentation remotely, and he's already here. Father Pedro RUBENS, Rector of the Catholic University of Pernambuco, Brazil, and former IFCU President 2012-2018. And Dr. Thérèse LEBRUN, Deputy President of the Catholic University of Lille, France. In terms of logistics, and the Secretary was very strong with this, right, Francois? Each of them will have 10 to 15 minutes maximum for an initial presentation. Afterwards, we will have 5 extra minutes following the same order to react to each other's presentation or complete their own argument. And finally, we will take questions from the audience. Having said that, and reminding the participants to respect, please, the times indicated, I give the floor to Dr. ANELLI.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you, dear colleague, for putting me in challenge with the coffee break. I will try to not to bore too much. Discussing diplomacy today may seem difficult. We are facing a season in which public opinion feels the sense of impotence of diplomacy, that of ambassadors and mediators in the face of major war crises. I don't quote them because everyone knows them. However, and one really a pain affects the Holy Land. However, we can overcome discouragement if we look at the complexity of diplomatic activity, which in addition to its outward significance, so to speak, has a deeper one. The deeper level is that of diplomacy in the cultural sense, which we could define as the ability to initiate and promote dialogue between different cultures. If I can speak as a Westerner, an Italian and a European, this happened because there has been and has built during the centuries a common cultural identity. Someone says that Europe is only a geographical expression. Europe is a cultural expression. A European is a European because he read Homerus, most of them translated, then the Latins, then Shakespeare, then Manzoni, then Hugo, and everybody else. And so the same is for philosophy. It doesn't exist a European who has not a European culture, only an Italian or French or Spanish culture. And if we think to some people who has been able to gather all these experiences, let's think about Erasmus. There's a wonderful book by an Italian Catholic writer, Ursula, on Erasmus. It's a very slight book published by, just a little advertising, by our university press. It's very interesting. And it explains his effort to give, to spread the idea, a modern idea for the time, of course, of Europe, against, of course, the reform who was increasing. Or let's think to a person, I would like to quote him because he has just that, he's just that, and he was our university awarded with an honorary degree, Jacques Delors. A lot of people make a big effort to bring the peace in the area of the world that during the history was the place of a continuous fight. And they succeeded. Or, just say, up to some years ago, we were sure that they succeeded. And now we are really afraid. But which is the role of IFCU? IFCU has a big, important role as an actor of cultural diplomacy. Let's remember, the Catholic University of Milan was founded in 1921. 1 year later, Mussolini made his putsch. It was exactly in the middle of the two steps of the same war that crossed the 20th century. And it was in an age and in an era in which it was very, speaking about a Catholic university, a Catholic scientist, who was a sort of contradictory in adjecto. A positivist, a scientist, would never accept that a Catholic might be a good scientist. Religion was, of course, superstition, according to their approach. And of course, I agree with what you said about the different approach of economy. Tognolo said something very interesting. Of course, his language is harder to understand. You have to translate his language in modern language, because of course it's hard to accept what says Tognolo when he says we have to come back to the Middle Age. Oh my God. But he says the commercial economy, the capitalistic economy, which lies its roots in the Renaissance, broke that harmony of the world which exists in the Middle Age. Of course, in the Middle Age, the situation, the production was not enough, so better if we had been able to increase the production, but the attitude can be different. And the cohesion of a society can be different. So I go back to the foundation of Catholic University and FCU at the time, not IC. It was a paradox. Catholic University in Italy was a paradox because, of course, Catholics were outside the politics, non-expedit, you remember. Catholic scientists could not be simply conceived by the scientist at that time. And Gemelli himself, Gemelli was a doctor, a physician, who studied with Golgi. Golgi was the triumph of the positivistic science. Then he converted, of course, everyone knows, and he decided to found a Catholic university with the idea that we had to open a political role for Catholic in the Italian society, and that a Catholic approach to science was possible. Because, of course, it does mean, Ex-Code Ecclesia is very clear, it does mean that no discount on the method. Science is always evidence-based, but a different attitude to the reason that impels you, that brings you to study, to look for a new truth compared with another truth. And with this idea, Catholic University in Europe were able to establish a relation and then to spread it to the whole world. Of course, always in a very hard situation. Just after World War II, and our IFCU grew together with the great international organization, the Society of Nations, before who was not so happy in its evolution, and then the organization of United Nations. But the idea is that the contribution of Catholic University to peace was essentially a contribution to dialogue between different cultures. I understand that such words, just let's think, said in 1945, 46, 48, could appear quite useless. Okay, we have really bigger problem. War is a clash of armies. You yourself has said that just remember that the Europeans share the same culture, but does not prevent them from fighting for years, for decades. So why do you say that culture may be the problem and the solution as well? Now we are understanding. Now we are understanding it, because clash of civilization. At least we are now seeing a clash of civilization. We are seeing the old attitude of the Russian emperor, not so different from the one of Peter the Great. We are seeing again the ambition of the Chinese emperor to expand his territory. And we are seeing a strong religious fight, ethnical fight in the Holy Land. Last Monday, we had we hold the ceremony of the opening of our academic year in Rome. The general one in Milan was held in the end of 2023. And we hosted the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Cardinal Pizzabal. And he said the true victim of what happened on October 7 is interreligious dialogue. So, what can do, and 10 minutes, I try to stay in 10 minutes. What can do Catholic University? Catholic University, first of all, can spend and can use their reputation and reliability. Many Catholic university, many institutions of education agencies belonging to the church or who declare themselves Catholic are chosen by non-Catholic students. It's a place where people can go and have a dialogue between their original culture and a pattern of value. Second, they can establish a network, a texture of dialogue between which spreads all over the world. There are universities from the whole world here. So ideas, but also people can move, and ideas move together with people. That's good. And the third, we can be an example of open mind. A mind open is the only way to peace, is the only way to dialogue, and of course, it's the only way to establish what we call cultural diplomacy. And I'm going to finish. What we say as cultural diplomacy is not simply organizing a nice symposium with the speakers coming from different countries, because of course we have already selected the people, and despite some, and normally speakers are polite and don't have a violent behavior. Cultural diplomacy means find a way to overcome the difficulty of people and countries to understand each other. We have really a common language which is spoken and heard in the great part of the world. So this network of universities can be really an important agent in cultural diplomacy. That's what I hope. Thank you.
Okay, ready. Thank you very much, Dr. ANELLI, thank you very much. And now we give the floor to Father Jenkins.
Thank you. It's good to speak to you, and I'm sorry I'm not with you in person. I just have a few remarks. I was asked to speak about the 1967 Land of Legs Statement on Catholic universities. That statement, as you may know, was composed by a group of university leaders from American universities, religious superiors from sponsoring communities, scholars, and one bishop, gathered in a place called Land of Legs in Wisconsin in the United States. It's owned by the University of Notre Dame. The gathering and the ensuing statement were in response to the International Federation of Catholic Universities, which asked its members to convene in regional conferences and reflect on Catholic higher education in response to the stirring reforms of Vatican II. If I were to summarize that statement, the thrust of it, I would say the 1967 Land O'Lakes Statement was an effort to define Catholic universities as communities of scholars and students engaged in the essential work of education and inquiry, grounded firmly in their Catholic mission, and to defend such communities in the context of that time from undue interference from either ecclesiastical or civil authorities extrinsic to them. In the US, United States context in recent decades, this document has become controversial and its interpretation distorted largely, I believe, for polemical purposes. It has been claimed by many that the statement attempted to declare complete independence of Catholic universities from the Church, and that it was the source of the secularization of Catholic universities and the diminishment of their Catholic mission. This interpretation cannot be sustained by a careful reading of the text. But the document and the controversy about it raises important questions about how to preserve the independence and integrity of academic communities from a variety of forces that seek to influence or control them. Though many things could be said here, I will make just 2 points in this intervention. First, I think the pressures our institutions experience is evidence of how important they are to the societies in which they work. Far from being ivory towers, that's a phrase in English sometimes used to indicate that they're divorced from the concerns of the world. The pressures our institutions are often under and the criticisms they receive is a sign of how our work has real, practical impact in society and indeed in the Church. In the United States, as you may know, there is currently ongoing controversy arising from the war in the Middle East involving some of our most distinguished secular institutions, controversies about free expression, about values, and about the education that their students receive. As you may know, the presidents of Harvard University and the University of Pennsylvania have been forced to resign over this controversy. The United States Congress has inserted itself. Laws are being proposed to punish and control institutions, or at least influence institutions. In Nicaragua, Catholic universities have been seized by the government because they were opposing the regime or thought to oppose the regime. Many, many other examples could be found. My point is that such interventions, as deeply unfortunate as they are, nevertheless testify to the importance and influence of our work for the society of which we are part. We must be discerning but courageous in defending their integrity. The second point I want to make is that as we face pressures, our Catholic mission is of tremendous value. The Catholic tradition, which affirms the harmony of faith and reason, gives us a basis for defending inquiry that is free and open to the truth. We have nothing to fear from the truth. Unlike secular peers, we have a basis in the Christian understanding of creation for trusting our minds through open and honest inquiry to know the truth. This is one major reason, I believe, that universities grew in the Catholic culture of Europe in the 13th century, ex corde ecclesiae, from the heart of the church. In addition, our Catholic mission gives us a set of values, a set of moral principles that can guide the education we offer, such as those affirming the dignity and worth of every student, a commitment to the common good and to justice, a special concern for the marginalized and the poor. In this way, I believe Catholic institutions have an asset that our secular peers lack. We have moral principles to guide our work, on the basis of which we can defend that work and articulate its value. To be honest, these principles are not so apparent at our secular peers, and I think that's one of the challenges they face in the current context. But these principles give Catholic institutions a purpose, a North Star, as we do our work. I'm sure there are many other questions worthy of discussion, but I will leave those for the discussion period. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Father Jenkins. So we heard in the morning Cardinal Tolentino talking about universities turning into dialogue laboratories. I believe was the word he used, the phrase he used. Dr. ANELLI talks about cultural diplomacy and the importance of dialogue in peace building. Father Jenkins says, and I quote, I love this phrase, we have nothing to fear from the truth. With these thoughts in mind, I give the floor to my good friend, Father RUBENS.
Gracias, Fernando. Pour moi, a été demandé de parler plutôt des reflets des universités catholiques d'Amérique latine dans l'avènement du nouvel ordre mondial. Mais d'abord, je voudrais saluer et féliciter notre présidente, la première femme présidente de la FIUC. C'est pas très diplomatique, prendre 100 ans pour élire une femme à la présidence d'une fédération. Mais quand même, nous sommes très heureux de ne pas célébrer ce centenaire avec cette dette avec la société qui a reconnu la place des femmes il y a très longtemps. Merci à vous. Et à votre nom, je salue tout le monde qui est dans cette assemblée. Voilà. Et Edgar Morin, lorsqu'il écrivit à la demande de l'UNESCO les 7 savoirs nécessaires à l'éducation de l'avenir ou du futur, il déclara, je cite, « Le futur se nomme incertitude ». Cette assertion nous incite à penser autrement et à sortir du confort de nos certitudes. En effet, comme le dit le cardinal Tolentino, qui est un poète, je cite, « Il existe un moment où nous nous rendons compte que les questions nous rapprochent plus des ouvertures du sens que ne font les réponses. » Je crois que c'est bien le cas de ces moments-là. Pour parler des reflets des universités catholiques d'Amérique latine dans l'avènement d'un nouvel ordre mondial, il nous faudra procéder par étapes. Tout d'abord, essayer de comprendre quel ordre mondial parle-t-on, puis tenter de discerner la réverbération de ces enjeux en Amérique latine, pour finalement pouvoir nous interroger sur la place de nos institutions dans ces différentes questions. Nous pouvons entendre par nouvel ordre mondial une diversité d'enjeux tout aussi primordiaux les uns que les autres. En premier lieu, nous sommes témoins de l'événement dans nos sociétés hyper connectées où plus rien ne semble être réalisable sans l'usage d'Internet, avec des points positifs comme on vient de faire l'expérience. Mais aussi, il y a de divers types de totalitarisme. Le premier totalitarisme économique, imposé par les GAFA, qu'on dit l'acronyme des géants du web, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon et Microsoft, qui d'un côté provoque un impact disruptif sur la manière d'enseigner et d'apprendre, et de l'autre côté contribue de façon vertigineuse à creuser les inégalités sociales et à accentuer la paupérisation d'une importante partie de la population mondiale. Mais il y a aussi des totalitarismes politiques marqués par des complexions croissantes à niveau mondial, de l'ignorance et des préjugés raciaux ou des classes. Il y a également une mise en question de la démocratie et un retour des manifestations fascistes. Il y a aussi des totalitarismes moraux où les nouvelles formes de bien-sens et bien-pensance condamnent non seulement les fondements de certains actes et paroles, mais encore les racines, comme ce n'était pas suffisant pour annuler le présent, d'en envoler le ressort et d'en défaire les trames, mais bien d'en ostraciser l'histoire. Voilà des défis qui pour nous sont plus graves encore du côté, dans la perspective catholique. Ensuite, nous pensons à notre planète, l'irréversibilité de ces dérèglements climatiques qui laissent entrevoir une redéfinition des géographies et une importante migration des populations. Occupées d'une guerre cognitive où les populations désinformées et manipulées s'y dresseraient les unes contre les autres. Avons-nous réalisé suffisamment le rôle des universités concernant les appels de Laudato Si? Certainement non, parce que le pape a écrit une deuxième encyclique, Laudate Deum, pour nous rappeler qu'il faut avancer davantage. La question brûlante de l'intelligence artificielle occupe également toute sa place. Savez-vous que les plus récents rejetons de l'intelligence artificielle ne disposent plus de réseaux numériques, mais bel et bien des neurones organiques? Que l'être humain tend de plus en plus à s'y machiniser et la machine à s'humaniser, de sorte que nous n'arrivons plus à distinguer ce qui, chez un transhumain, était à l'origine, si la biologie ou la technologie. Mais si tous ces éléments délimitent en effet un nouvel ordre mondial, ce qui semble le point le plus crucial de cette évolution et qui sans doute touche le plus près nos fonctions d'enseignement et de transmission, est de faire le constat que l'évolution effarante des machines pensantes menace désormais les métiers où la connaissance, l'intelligence et la créativité étaient jusqu'ici l'apanage exclusif de notre humanité. Et alors l'Église pourrait être experte en humanité, mais maintenant ça s'est mis en question, doit être pris autrement. Or, l'Amérique latine est traversée, voire façonnée par ces nouvelles questions sans avoir réglé des problèmes anciens. Elle est plus que jamais le lieu d'injustice et de l'inégalité, d'appauvrissement, du chômage, de l'exclusion et de la violence. Elle est le lieu de la désinformation, terre de colonisation et d'oppression. Voici qu'elle est à présent le théâtre privilégié, même si elle n'est pas l'apanage exclusif, d'un processus sournois qui transforme notre vie quotidienne dans un flux de données exploitées par des entreprises à des fins lucratives. C'est ce que les sociologues britanniques Nick Cowdery et le professeur de communication mexicain Ulises Mejias, en 2019, nomment colonialisme numérique, qui est à l'œuvre dans une communication des données omniprésente qui préfigure un nouvel ordre mondial. Je cite, « fondé sur les surveillances continues et offrant de nouvelles opportunités sans précédent de discrimination sociale et d'influence comportementale. Ainsi, affirme-t-il, s'y trouve normalisée, je cite encore, l'exploitation des êtres humains à travers les données, tout comme le colonialisme historique gouvernait ces sujets pour le profit, en s'appropriant leur territoire et leurs ressources. Le colonialisme des données ouvre la voie d'une nouvelle étape du capitalisme, dont nous commençons à peine à voir les contours, la capitalisation illimitée de la vie. » Fin de citation. Nous pouvons alors nous demander quelle peut être la mission d'une université catholique latino-américaine d'un semblable dystopie. Comment peut-elle incarner une Église qui s'y fait l'écho de ces questions, sans les circonscrire par des réponses dogmatiques, mais qui accepte de cheminer à l'exemple d'Abraham, sans certitude autre que celle de la foi en un Dieu de bonté et de justice? Ne serait-il pas le style d'une Église en processus de sortie aux universités missionnaires, ou bien une démarche synodale selon la perspective du pape François? Les traits principaux de l'Église d'Amérique latine, il faut comprendre, l'Église d'Amérique latine a commencé à exister comme une Église avec un visage propre qui est après Vatican II. Donc, l'Église d'Amérique latine a toujours été de lutter pour le respect de la liberté et de la dignité de l'être humain. Par ailleurs, la plupart d'entre nous, latino-américains, sommes des métis. La métissage, c'est notre identité principale. Dans nos veines coule le sang de l'oppresseur et de l'opprimé. Nous sommes nous-mêmes le théâtre de la lutte que nous devons mener dans nos choix, dans nos actes, dans nos prises de parole et de décisions. Il nous faut alors réfléchir aux enjeux des différents prismes de ce nouvel ordre mondial et bien choisir nos combats. Quelle est la place de nos universités dans ces questions et quels défis relever? Il semble que puisse alors se révéler plus clairement l'idiosyncrasie de nos institutions en ce qu'elles répondent à l'appel des sociétés et des cultures, au pluriel, dans lesquelles elles sont insérées et qu'elles contribuent à faire grandir. Bien entendu, il est hors de question de perdre la course au numérique. Nous ne pouvons dans aucun cas en manquer les étapes et rester sur les bas-côtés, sous peine d'être effacés de la carte des institutions d'enseignement supérieur. Mais c'est-à-dire qu'il faut pactiser avec le colonialisme numérique, accepter d'instaurer la politique digitale entre nos murs, jouer le tout numérique et ainsi accentuer encore plus l'exclusion sociale par l'inaccessibilité des études supérieures pour ceux ou celles qui ne possèdent pas un smartphone et qui n'ont pas l'accès à l'Internet chez soi. C'est bel et bien à cela qu'il nous faut réfléchir. Quelle société voulons-nous? Quelle Église voulons-nous? Quel savoir voulons-nous transmettre et comment? Sommes-nous ouverts et accessibles à tous? Ou acceptons-nous de renforcer l'exclusion sociale que l'élitisme digital contribue à causer? Il semble bien que nous ayons le devoir d'avoir une pensée éclairée à ce sujet et d'alerter la société sur les dérives d'une numérisation ostracière que plus rien ne semble circonscrit ou contrôlé. Un autre aspect qui nous semble essentiel est d'occuper notre place dans les débats éthiques et de contribuer à penser l'humain. Dans dans la course au transhumanisme et à l'humanisation de la machine, il faut savoir poser de bonnes questions et au bon moment. Assiste-t-on aux prémices d'une nouvelle humanité? Qui décide véritablement de ces transformations? Il semble indispensable d'être présent lors des décisions gouvernementales, de promouvoir des cercles de pensée et de soutenir des recherches qui permettent d'éclairer nos mentalités sur ces différents sujets. Il semble qu'il faille, plus que jamais, être là où les choses se passent et où l'orage gronde. Seulement ainsi, nous pourrons faire honneur à notre mission et à notre catholicité, celle-ci dans sa diversité incontournable et à partir de nos universités, chacune avec sa singularité et son mode de contribuer. Je vous remercie.
Thanks a lot, Father Bruns. Gracias, muchas gracias, Pedro. So we move from uncertainty and unanswered interesting and provoking questions to our last participant, Dr. LeBrun. You have the floor.
Merci. L'Université catholique de Lille, qui est née en 1875 et qui est impliquée depuis toujours dans la Fédération internationale des universités catholiques, est une université qui a la chance d'être complète. On travaille sur l'ensemble des domaines de connaissances et notamment, elle a 40 000 étudiants aujourd'hui, elle a la chance de disposer d'un secteur sanitaire et social avec 1000 lits d'hôpitaux, 700 lits pour des personnes âgées dépendantes et nous suivons également 130 enfants qui présentent entre 3 ans et 20 ans un handicap psychique. Dans le secteur de la santé et du social, nous avons ajouté une innovation au-delà de l'innovation technologique, au-delà de l'innovation pédagogique, l'innovation sociétale. Elle a été évoquée tout à l'heure, ma sœur, par votre intervention. Cette innovation sociétale, j'ai bien aimé la question qui pourrait nous faire dire d'ici quelques décennies, est-ce que vraiment nous sommes dans cette innovation sociétale? En 1875, nous avons été créés, bien sûr avec l'accord de l'Église, mais par des chefs d'entreprise chrétiens qui voulaient notamment faire vivre la pensée sociale chrétienne. Et c'est à partir de là que j'ai développé quelques illustrations. Avec le père Thierry Magnin, qui fut aussi recteur de l'Université catholique de Lyon, on travaille beaucoup sur ces principes de la pensée sociale chrétienne dans nos différents projets. Et le père Magnin a ajouté le principe de l'écologie intégrale, qui n'était pas, je pense, dans les principes initialement annoncés. Tout est lié, clameur des pauvres et clameur de la terre, avec l'écologie environnementale et l'écologie humaine. J'aurai l'occasion de l'illustrer brièvement. On notera également, et je fais un petit détour par ex corde ecclésiae, constitution dans laquelle notre recteur Michel Falise, ensuite président de la FIUC, a été très impliqué. Ex corde ecclésiae est un texte fondateur, Michel Falise dit une sorte de loi cadre pour les universités et sur les universités catholiques. Et je reprends quelque chose qui m'a marqué en préparant cette conférence et que j'ai entendu ce matin de Patrick Valdrini, c'est que si ce texte était important pour les universités catholiques, il l'était aussi pour l'ensemble de l'Église, qui exprimait à travers ce texte la façon dont elle percevait et accueillait le monde contemporain de la pensée, de la science et de la culture, et entendait dialoguer avec lui dans ces lieux d'interface que sont les universités catholiques. J'ai beaucoup aimé cette phrase, et tu as raison, Patrick, au-delà d'un texte fondateur à sans doute ne pas trop toucher, il vaut mieux voir comment ce monde contemporain évolue considérablement, et on l'évoque depuis ce matin. J'ai relevé également, et je pense que notre présidente Isabelle Gilles y sera sensible, que dans ce cadre-là, la FIUC est devenue un interlocuteur autonome et crédible et considéré comme un corps intermédiaire. J'aime bien ces deux notions, une fédération corps intermédiaire et des universités interfaces entre l'Église et la société. Et donc, dans nos missions de recherche, de formation et de service, nous parlons souvent du service à la société, nous sommes effectivement au service de la société et de l'Église. Texte majeur de ce point de vue qui déjà avait inclus la démarche participative puisque les apports des universités catholiques ont été reconnus, écoutés, considérés au-delà des choix, bien entendu, qui ont été faits. Je voudrais prendre juste quelques exemples de ce que nous essayons à Lille de respecter à travers la pensée sociale chrétienne, une grande sensibilité au bien commun et l'option préférentielle pour les pauvres, nous la traduisons souvent par l'option préférentielle pour les plus vulnérables. Nous avons créé, et ce quartier est fini depuis 2003, un nouveau quartier que j'appelle nouveau quartier de vie et de ville. C'était sous mon rectorat. Et dans ce quartier, nous avons souhaité que soit fait droit à des personnes handicapées, depuis le plus jeune enfant jusqu'à la personne très âgée, et sur tous les types de handicap, le handicap psychique, le handicap physique, mais aussi le handicap social. Par exemple, pour des sans domicile fixe qui sont malades et qui ont besoin d'être suivis psychiquement, mais également sur leur maladie physique. Dans ce quartier, nous avons souhaité que le pouvoir d'agir des habitants qui sont arrivés là, après que nous ayons lancé le projet, et qui se mêlent aux étudiants, aux soignants, puisque nous avons là un de nos hôpitaux et également un établissement pour personnes âgées dépendantes, que les habitants puissent exercer leur pouvoir d'agir dans le quartier. Ça n'est pas toujours simple, et que ce quartier soit aussi un quartier de fraternité. J'ai repris quelques éléments de la doctrine sociale chrétienne. Je ne développe pas. Humanicité a fait l'objet d'une reconnaissance par la FIUC en 2015 à Melbourne avec un prix, et également par le Vatican, puisque nous avons reçu pendant une semaine complète, à la demande du Vatican, la RAI, la télévision italienne, pour filmer ce que nous faisions sur ce quartier qui apparaît très original dans sa mixité. C'est aujourd'hui 6000 personnes qui s'y trouvent sur 15 hectares, étudiants, soignants, chercheurs, personnes en situation de handicap, habitants, et qui essaient de travailler ensemble à travers un laboratoire d'innovation sociétale que nous y avons développé, et ceci nous a donné des idées pour d'autres laboratoires d'innovation sociétale. Une deuxième illustration, je passe très vite, c'est que nous avons rassemblé ce qui se faisait en matière d'éthique dans l'université. L'éthique reste dans nos différents établissements, mais également un gros laboratoire qui s'appelle Ethics, je ne développe pas, très pluridisciplinaire, développe des recherches dans tous les domaines, mais sa spécificité, c'est qu'on y trouve des philosophes, des éthiciens, des théologiens, mais également des personnes qui travaillent dans la technologie, dans le numérique, dans l'éthologie que j'ai découvert. L'éthologie, c'est la science des animaux. Pourquoi s'intéresser ? Eh bien, par exemple, dans nos EHPAD, nos établissements pour personnes âgées dépendantes, il y a de la médiation humaine, il y a de la médiation technologique, des robots, et il y a de la médiation animale. Et on regarde et on compare ces différents types de médiation. C'est juste une illustration que je donne, mais on trouve aussi des médecins, des psychologues, des personnes de la communication. Par exemple, sur la communication d'influence, on a beaucoup parlé des data et du numérique depuis ce matin. Je m'appuie également, parce que c'est relié à la FIUC, sur le programme Uniservitate, par ailleurs porté grâce à Porticus, Richard Bross nous a rejoints, où on s'est lancé également sur le service learning. J'aimais beaucoup cette notion, servir pour apprendre et apprendre pour servir, que nous avions découvert dans une assemblée générale de notre Fédération des universités catholiques de l'Europe et du Liban. Nous nous y sommes lancés avec comme tête de file pour l'Europe la KU Leuven, et le père Magnin, qui vient de sortir un article là-dessus, nous dit qu'au fond, c'est l'acquisition de compétences professionnelles et de connaissances académiques avec l'exposition à un terrain et une relecture personnelle et critique qui va donc au-delà du stage ou de l'engagement étudiant associatif classique. Et dans ce cadre, ce lien entre un enseignement académique, Le sens et l'exercice du service et la responsabilité sociale permet alors un apprentissage plus performant. Des étudiants de notre faculté de droit, en lien avec des avocats en exercice et avec leurs enseignants-chercheurs, vont par exemple aider les migrants qui se trouvent dans la jungle de Calais, ceux qui veulent passer vers la Grande-Bretagne, les aident à découvrir leurs droits. J'ai choisi une dernière illustration avant de conclure. Nous avions créé en 2006 un institut du développement durable et responsable. En 2012, avec mon successeur, un programme s'est déployé sur une trajectoire de décarbonation pour les bâtiments historiques de notre université. Avec notre nouveau recteur depuis 2020, Patrick Scoffler, nous avons, dans l'année de la mobilisation pour le climat, signé l'accord de Grenoble, signé un pacte bas carbone avec la ville de Lille, où nous nous trouvons fortement, même si nous sommes ailleurs, élaboré un MOOC pour que tous les étudiants et les enseignants-chercheurs puissent y accéder, 50 séances de 20 minutes chacune, avec 5 thématiques, enjeux climat, énergie et ressources, biodiversité, enjeux économiques, enjeux sociaux. Un groupe de travail est aussi impliqué sur l'impact carbone dans notre université, bien sûr les voyages internationaux, bien sûr les trajets domicile-travail, mais nos établissements de santé, hélas, remportent la palme avec les médicaments, les rejets, etc., et également nos résidences universitaires, puisque nous portons une vingtaine de résidences, un peu plus de 20, et là, bien sûr, ainsi que la restauration, cela dégage un impact carbone important sur lequel alors nous travaillons. Dans cette continuité, on a fait une convention climat universitaire sur climat et écologie fin 2022, avec des étudiants et des personnels. 55 propositions sont venues sur les thèmes se soigner, se nourrir, habiter, se déplacer, apprendre. Nous en avons sorti 3 grands chantiers prioritaires et un chantier transversal, c'est-à-dire viser une zéro émission nette dans notre quartier à Lille à horizon de 2030, et ces chantiers se déploient à compter de 2024. Je voudrais, en conclusion, terminer, y compris en saluant particulièrement Sofia Opatska et l'Université d'Ukraine, parce que nous étions en 2010, du 20 au 22 mai, à Lviv, en Ukraine. La thématique était « Comment les universités catholiques promeuvent-elles l'humanisation de la société dans leur mission d'enseignement, de recherche et de service ?» Et il m'est revenu la joie de faire la synthèse de ces journées que nous avons passées à Lviv, en Ukraine. J'en retiens quelques points. L'important, au cœur de notre réflexion et de notre action d'université catholique, c'est de promouvoir toute personne humaine, mais aussi toute la personne humaine, horizontalement et verticalement, si vous permettez. C'est bien sûr, à travers l'option préférentielle pour les pauvres, l'accueil des personnes, la promotion de la justice, mais aussi la mise en valeur et le développement de professions à dimension sociale. Elles sont très secouées aujourd'hui, en France en tout cas, les métiers de l'humain n'attirent plus, et un souci constant de la coopération et du transfert de compétences. J'ajoute, développé lors de cette assemblée à Lviv, l'importance d'un questionnement éthique et théologique dans tous nos travaux, dans toutes nos matières, en prenant en compte la dimension spirituelle de chaque être humain, dimension qui excède de loin l'appartenance à une foi ou à une religion. Et pour ne pas faire trop long, je termine sur ce point suivant. Du point de vue de la formation, il est nécessaire, était-il dit alors, que les universités catholiques insufflent cette dimension spirituelle dans divers domaines, intellectuels bien sûr et académiques, mais également esthétiques, on vient parler d'une diplomatie culturelle, éthique et religieux. Cultiver la dimension spirituelle, c'est ainsi harmoniser beaucoup de jeux, J-E, aïe, personnels, en recherchant une sorte de symphonie entre ces différents jeux personnels et en même temps la convivialité des différences, intérieures et extérieures, de façon solide, ouverte, responsable et solidaire. Pour notre tradition d'université catholique, il est également important de faire référence à la dimension mystique que recèle chaque être humain, car nous faisons tous l'expérience que dans toute vie, il y a des éléments qui relèvent de l'indicible. Merci.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Brown, for your presentation. One of that made me remember a phrase that I once heard from Pope Francis, heard in Spanish though, but a free translation will be a Catholic university is a place where the world gets to know the church and the church gets to know the world. La Universidad Católica es el lugar donde el mundo conoce a la iglesia y la iglesia conoce al mundo. And thanks a lot for giving so many examples of how to form and educate social choreographers and social poets, as the Holy Father is asking us to do. So now, and thanking the presentators, the speakers for your discipline in terms of time, thanks a lot for that. We are going to the second part. There will be 5 minutes to react to each other's presentations or to deepen your argument, whatever you want to do. And maybe I should ask you something else. You can do that keeping in mind what Cardinal Tolentino asked us today, because he asked us, he sent us a mission. He asked us to turn the universities into dialogue labs. As you were saying, Dr. ANELLI, essential for peace building. So with that in mind, and taking Cardinal Tolentino's position and what he asked us to do, you have the floor.
That's exactly the way we carried out our duty or task in what I described as cultural diplomacy, or contribution by the university to cultural diplomacy. But hearing to the presentation or to the other speakers, or listening to the other speakers, two suggestions came to my mind. The first, speaking about cultural diplomacy, but we cannot forget that sometimes it became cultural colonization. And that was, we cannot deny. We must be aware of that. We must remember that bringing the voice of Christ in other lands sometimes has been used as a tool, useful for some king to affirm the power of his country in new lands. Now the time has passed, and I think it's quite ridiculous, the cancel culture. And maybe our cultural diplomacy can be, on the one hand, can charge on its own shoulders the duty to challenge this idea of canceling the past instead of understanding it, which is the most stupid thing you can say, but it's very fashion now. It's a la page, this idea. And the strength, in my opinion, of our Catholic universities and the church is that the church has been saying the same thing for 20th century. Maybe we have not been saying that in the best way, or the behavior was not always the best possible, but the idea was the same. And the strength of this idea can, I don't say justify, but in some way, help to forgive some mistakes made in the past. And to try to understand that bringing the Christian culture was not colonization, as someone says. So in my opinion, it's a very strong duty now. It's a very strong task we have to face. The second is that the church is now still able to create new, important, strong concepts. It was mentioned ecology, the idea of integral ecology was born inside the church. John Paul II started speaking about ecologic conversion, and Francis, of course, we all know, speaks about integral ecology, which is very important, because his message is don't hope, human beings, that the development of technology and the improvement of your technology, which is endlessly improving, is the solution to what is happening to the planet. The solution, the answer, if any, and we are not sure that an answer is still possible, or we are going beyond the line, the answer is in changing the mind, in changing the way people live, or the way people understand the relations, is in economy and in social science, not in technology. Technology can help you to clean up a shore if some oil has spilled outside a boat. I mean, it doesn't help you to go back on the climate change, which is too massive. You have to change the way you use industry, the way you help people to access to richness, your idea of development and well-being. So, I finish. It's a strong cultural message, because it says, it's not simply, let's wait for God to help us. He says, we have to help us because we have a duty. So I think it's important seeing that the church is still able to tell the truth sometimes. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. ANELLI. Father Jenkins, you have the floor.
As well as I would like, so I don't have much to say beyond what I've already said. But I do think the just responding to the last remark, I do think the challenge of our time in society is trying to respond to great moral questions without a moral framework in which to decide them. And I think that that's a reason for a lot of the political cacophony that exists in the public forum these days. And what we can bring is that moral framework. So I hope we can do that through our institutions. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Jenkins. Short and deep. For the RUBENS.
Alors, je suis, depuis 18 ans, je suis recteur d'une université, donc j'ai mis ça en dinosaure, mais aujourd'hui, j'avoue que je suis plus intéressé à trouver des bonnes questions que m'habituer à des réponses qu'on a toujours données et seulement réinterprétées. Dans ces cas-là, ça m'a fait penser, qu'est-ce que c'est le dialogue? Parce que quand j'étais en France pour faire des études, ça fait plus de 20 ans, et il y a une sœur de Corée qui travaillait sur les questions de dialogue interreligieux. Il y a eu un congrès, tout le monde parlait de dialogue et elle n'a rien dit. Alors on était quand même intrigués. À la fin, elle dit pourquoi vous n'avez pas parlé sur le dialogue, puisque c'est votre question? Et c'est parce que vous, les Occidentaux, lorsqu'ils parlent de dialogue, sont en train de vous disputer des idées. Et on ne sait pas comment faire. Pour nous, le dialogue commence avec la recherche d'une harmonie. Alors tout le monde ne savait pas quoi dire. C'est pour cela que j'ai dit, qu'est-ce qu'on dit lorsqu'on parle de dialogue? Et nous, jésuites aussi, on était en train de chercher, la dernière congrégation générale, de faire un document pour l'ensemble du monde. Alors évidemment, il y a toutes les questions des sociétés passent un peu par des débats. Et lorsqu'on parlait de questions, par exemple, qui ça semblait très évidente, la question des abus, etc., c'était pas possible d'arriver à parler ensemble. On ne partait pas de la même prémisse, etc. Donc, on arrive à des situations d'une diversité. Et dialoguer aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas avoir deux opinions et chercher une troisième route. C'est plus complexe, comme Edgar Morin insiste, d'autres. Et cette complexité, qui semblait un problème, peut-être elle donne des pistes de solutions, c'est-à-dire on ne peut plus trouver des solutions simples par des problèmes complexes. On ne peut plus trouver des solutions éternelles par des questions temporelles. C'est-à-dire, c'est ça qui m'habite un peu, et dans une fédération, c'est bien là les problèmes. Quel modèle d'université? Si on demande ça, par exemple, aux universités américaines, elles vont dire des choses qui, pour nous, peut-être, ça ne dit pas la même chose, mais ils sont rapportés à une société qui est différente de notre société. Si on va en Inde, qu'est-ce qu'ils vont dire? Qu'est-ce que c'est une université? Alors, on croit quand même que lorsqu'on parle catholique, on a tout réglé. Et là, peut-être, on est en train de rater une quête d'une catholicité plus, avec plusieurs visages, comme le cardinal Tolentino a parlé aujourd'hui, une vérité plurielle, une catholicité au visage pluriel, qui ça va nous donner certainement plus de travail, mais certainement plus de beauté, et surtout que les jeunes générations sont très, très, très marquées par cette diversité, sinon séduites par des diversités, n'importe lesquelles. Alors, si on n'entre pas là-dedans, peut-être ils ne vont pas avoir des critères pour savoir distinguer dans la diversité ce qu'il faut prendre comme chemin à faire. Mais je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu à la question, mais j'ai dit laboratoire de dialogue, oui, mais dans un laboratoire, on ne choisit pas toujours la manifestation de la chose qu'on est en train de chercher. Donc le dialogue, pour moi, ce n'est plus une chose universelle. Il faudra creuser encore et savoir qu'est-ce qu'on veut dire lorsqu'on parle de dialogue et à partir d'où. Comme vous disiez, il y a encore la question de la colonisation. Ce n'est pas uniquement une question des pays sous-développés, c'est une question globale. Et la colonisation numérique nous a divers ou nous prévient que ça peut être plus sérieux qu'on ne pensait pas jusqu'alors.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Father Rubens. And you're right. You're right. We need to think about what we understand by dialogue. Absolutely. And that's a task that can be provided, analyzed, and taken care of by us, by IFCU. Absolutely. Because actually IFCU could be a big, huge dialogue laboratory. Dr. LeBrun, you have the floor.
Vous nous avez demandé de réagir effectivement à ce que nous avons entendu. J'ai retenu 3 choses et je me suis donné un joker. La première chose, c'est la notion de diplomatie culturelle que le docteur ANELLI a évoquée. J'ai découvert, grâce à cette manifestation de la FIUC, la diplomatie universitaire, qui doit englober beaucoup de choses, et qu'une de nos jeunes collègues, également impliquée dans la politique locale, entame une thèse, d'ailleurs je pense François qu'elle s'est rapprochée de toi, sur cette diplomatie universitaire. Donc ça veut dire que ça intéresse effectivement les jeunes et que je trouve que c'est, à mes yeux, un chantier nouveau qui est intéressant et qui englobe très certainement des dimensions de diplomatie culturelle, mais également le domaine large que couvrent les universités et nos universités catholiques ont sûrement leur rôle à jouer dans ce domaine. Le père Jenkins disait « We have nothing to fear from truth ». Moi, je retiens aller au-delà de nos peurs, parce qu'au fond, c'est ce que le pape François a dit, je pense, Isabelle, lorsqu'il est venu à l'Université catholique du Portugal récemment, et que nous avons repris pour notre carte de vœux universitaire. Et il disait, beaucoup mieux que je ne le dis, aller au-delà de nos peurs et aller vers nos rêves. Et tant aux vœux de ma commune d'habitation, samedi soir, sur laquelle se trouvent aussi nos hôpitaux et le quartier humanicité que j'évoquais tout à l'heure, le maire, qui n'est pas un croyant, qui est un homme de gauche par ailleurs, nous sommes très proches, a basé son discours sur le fait qu'on nous manie désormais beaucoup avec les peurs, les violences, et qu'il faut pouvoir aller au-delà de cela, ce qui n'est pas si simple, hein, c'est facile de le dire comme cela. Tu viens un peu de l'évoquer, Pedro, à travers la notion de dialogue. Nous n'arrivons plus toujours à entrer en dialogue. Et quand je dis à mes enfants qui ont maintenant 44, 42 et 40 ans, il faut entrer en dialogue. Certes, on a d'autres cultures parmi nous, et dans le nord de la France, c'est très prégnant. Je sens que ça serait dit parce qu'il y a réellement des violences, il y a réellement des exactions, on va dire. Et donc, il y a tout un travail autour de ces domaines qui n'est pas loin de nous. Donc, au-delà des peurs. Pedro RUBENS a évoqué le colonialisme des données qui peut aller jusqu'à la capitalisation illimitée de la vie. Je crois que c'est le danger le plus important qui saute à nos yeux aujourd'hui parce qu'il envahit absolument tout. Depuis le petit enfant quasiment qui vient de naître, ou en tout cas qui est capable de tenir un téléphone ou une tablette, jusqu'à tous les domaines de la vie. Et donc, ce domaine-là, qui permet également de marier les questions éthiques, les questions sociales, les questions technologiques, et bien d'autres, est un domaine capital. Les questions de la communication aussi, et c'est un domaine extrêmement transversal. De toute façon, je crains bien, sans être trop pessimiste, que si l'on va vers le capitalisme illimité de la vie, on ne mette quasiment fin aussi à cette vie d'une façon ou d'une autre, au-delà même du fait qu'il nous faut déjà sauver notre terre. Et puis, je ne pense pas qu'il m'en voudra, y compris s'il est dans la salle. Je parlais ce matin avec le père Jean Héret du Luxembourg, il est là, Jean, et nous évoquions peut-être que la notion de complexité, que moi je n'aime pas toujours, parce que dès qu'on dit que c'est complexe, souvent on me dit « ton université est complexe ». Il y a plein de dimensions, plein de domaines, toutes sortes d'établissements, etc. Je dis non, elle n'est pas complexe, elle est comme la vie. Et Jean, vous disiez ce matin, la complexité, c'est aussi la densité des questions. J'ai beaucoup été marquée par cette densité, parce qu'au fond, ça donne une troisième dimension à la notion de complexité. Et ça va rejoindre ces notions de laboratoire de dialogue, de nécessité d'entrer en relation humaine réelle, profonde, et ça touche des éléments qu'on a entendus au cours de cette table ronde sur laquelle vous nous avez proposé de réagir en quelques minutes au-delà de notre temps de parole.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. LeBrun. You make me remember something else. There's a whole chapter in Fratelli Tutti dedicated to dialogue. Maybe we should start reading that again and rereading that. And I remember that one of the most beautiful quotes in terms of what dialogue is for Pope Francis, I'm sorry, I only remember the quote in Spanish, is, el diálogo es ceder algo en favor del bien común. That's how he defined it. And he even said, y decía, quien esté dispuesto a eso, o los que estén dispuestos a eso, van a ser los héroes del futuro. So maybe that's what we need to start forming and educating. The heroes of the future. Okay, so do we have time for questions? Yes, okay. I guess there are many questions. So. Yad 12, Bethlehem University. Professor ANELLI quoted my patriarch, Pizzaballa, saying that the war in the Holy Land has failed the interreligious dialogue. It's not only the interreligious dialogue, it's everything actually, because war is a total human failure. My comment and the question is, how can we as universities be universities, which is an academic institution, and at the same time a political institution? Because, for example, the Palestinian universities, they have decided years ago to have boycott the Israelis' universities. So there is no absolutely any relationship or dialogue. Because maybe in the past they were hoping that one of the sides, exactly as Brother Jenkins said, they may be courageous enough to say the truth and be courageously honest to say the truth. While we know in politics, well, I'm not sure, but I can see that in politics we don't have values, or should we have values? Because when it comes to blood, as also what Professor De Boca said this morning, it's a question of life. When there is war, people are killed, the whole thing is totally different. When the crisis, this current crisis started between Palestine and Israel, many universities published statements, as what happened in Ukraine too. And whatever any university published a statement, there were people against and people with. So in politics, or let me put it again, how, and it's an open question for everyone, how can we be a university, academic center, teach our values, even Catholic values and the human values, but in the same time try to be political, where we know in politics, it's politics. I mean, it's interests, it's whatever you want in politics. You can change black to white and white to green even. I mean, it's politics and war. And thank you.
Could I speak to that?
Please go ahead.
It's an excellent question and a timely question here in the United States, where institutions, mainly secular institutions, have been caught up in this controversy over the Middle East and created tremendous discord. Here's 2 points, or maybe 3, but 2. One is, universities are best at long-term, careful research, discussion, inquiry. We're not designed to be kind of fast-moving political actors, right? And so I think it's important not to pretend that that we should kind of enter into every political fray. But at the same time, particularly as Catholic universities, we do have a kind of moral light posts, moral beacons in a way. And I think my own policy is, if something's particularly relevant to the university, and it touches on, the principles for which we stand, I will make statements. Not often, but sometimes. We do have a place in Israel where it's a Tentor Ecumenical Institute. So I felt we were at the University of Notre Dame was touched by this current conflict, and I made 2 statements. One was a kind of mirrored Pope Francis' statement, asking for peace, asking for a just and lasting peace. I did join with it immediately after October 7th, joined with a Jewish university, just simply because the Hamas attacks were directed against civilians, innocent civilians, killed them. That clearly is can't be accepted, and I didn't want to appear to be Notre Dame appeared to be indifferent to that fact, and so I joined with one of our Jewish colleagues to condemn particularly those attacks. The danger is you get into an endless cycle of statements. So I try to stay at a high level, but I think the question is a very good one, because on one hand, you can't absent yourself from the pressing issues of the day as universities, as institutions that stand for a certain set of values. At the same time, you don't want to be drawn into the kind of short-term politics of the situation. And I guess the answer I'm trying to give is there's a certain art to this, to knowing what times and at what level of comment should come. I don't think it's right either not to say anything ever, nor is it right to try to kind of daily make some statement on whatever political issues are in front of the public, but to find that place where you could kind of articulate the deep values for which you stand in light of the kind of events of the day without being drawn in to this sort of low-level contentious politics. It's difficult. And as I said, I mentioned Harvard and University of Pennsylvania presidents were removed precisely because of this sort of difficulty. So it is very difficult for presidents. But anyway, that's the very broad framework I try to follow.
Thank you, Father Jenkins. Anybody else wants to react to that? Okay. By the way, Fratelli Tutti also have a very good definition about la mejor política, so we can always go back and refer to that. Another question?
Oui, merci. C'est peut-être moins une question qu'une remarque. On a évoqué effectivement la diplomatie scientifique et je pense que c'est un point important pour le présent et pour le proche avenir. Lors du dernier forum de Davos qui vient de se tenir, il y a un rapport qui a été publié qui montre que les différentes formes de coopération à travers le monde se réduisent et sont de moins en moins nombreuses et que bien évidemment la coopération scientifique est directement concernée par les tensions géopolitiques qu'il y a à travers le monde. Et on voit bien qu'avec la guerre en Ukraine, on retrouve des tensions entre blocs que l'on connaissait bien et que de la même façon, les tensions que l'on voit entre les États-Unis et la Chine et plus largement les Occidentaux, les Européens et la Chine ont un impact également sur la politique universitaire sous ses différentes formes, que ce soit la mobilité étudiante ou que ce soit bien évidemment la recherche. Et je pense qu'on a sans doute une réflexion à mener qui peut être une réflexion au niveau de chacune des universités. Quelle politique scientifique, quelle coopération scientifique voulez-vous mener à travers le monde au moment où on voit bien qu'il y a ce pluralisme des valeurs que vous évoquiez, Monsieur le recteur ANELLI, en évoquant le clash des civilisations, alors sous une autre approche qu'Huntington, mais on voit bien effectivement qu'il y a là un pluralisme et une diversité et des oppositions de valeurs. Et puis je pense que ça nous concerne également collectivement, dans la mesure où la fédération, depuis son origine, tente à promouvoir la coopération scientifique entre ses membres. Et puis, je vous le rappelle, la fédération, d'une certaine manière, on évoquait les années 20, la fédération a annoncé à une modeste dimension la création de l'UNESCO quelques années plus tard, 30 ans plus tard finalement. Et nous sommes présents comme organisation non gouvernementale à l'UNESCO comme dans d'autres institutions. Et donc je pense qu'il y a une réflexion à mener sur comment nos établissements catholiques se situent dans ces tensions géopolitiques et leur impact sur la coopération et comment également une diplomatie scientifique d'Église peut se mener. Quand je dis d'église, j'inclus bien évidemment un certain nombre d'institutions, à commencer par l'Académie pontificale des sciences, mais pas uniquement. Le dicaster, bien évidemment, peut être intégré, doit être intégré dans cette réflexion. Merci.
Thanks a lot, François, for your comment. Absolutely. Okay, any other questions?
Léonard Santédi de Kinshasa, Congo. J'ai beaucoup apprécié cette idée de dialogue, de rapport enrichissant entre les cultures. Je constate ces derniers temps en Afrique une certaine remise en question, évidemment dans les études déjà décoloniales, une certaine remise en question de l'Occident dans sa version de colonisation. Alors, notre association pourrait être attentive pour que cette remise en question et même ce rejet ne soit pas non plus le rejet d'une certaine colonisation du savoir. Hein? Il y a un proverbe chez nous qui dit que la sagesse n'habite pas une seule case. C'est vraiment dans la polyphonie qu'on peut faire monter une symphonie qui soit enrichissante pour toutes les cultures. Pouvons-nous être attentifs à ces niveaux? Et merci à Madame Brun par rapport au développement de cette dimension vraiment de l'éthique, de l'esthétique. Nous sommes très attentifs à cela dans notre contexte pour que, même quand nous parlons de l'écologie, on ne s'arrête pas simplement à un logos, mais qu'on va jusqu'à une écosophie, à un partage de sagesse, une nouvelle manière d'habiter notre monde. Est-ce qu'on est attentif à ce dialogue de sagesse, ce partage de sagesse? Juste une invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy this is provoking this kind of thoughts. Well, I don't know if there are any other questions. Do we have time? Or? Okay. Isabel.
Just a very brief comment. One is to let you know about the work of the Federation regarding the recent conflicts and understanding and following everything that has been said by the participants and also our colleague from Palestine. The Federation, since the Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, then we reacted on the day of the invasion. There was a board meeting in Paris denouncing the invasion. 1 month after the seizure of the Università Centroamericana, we reacted, denouncing also, and I would like to thank here the cooperation of all the presidents of the regional associations who co-signed the declaration denouncing the seizure of Università Centroamericana. And we also made a statement denouncing the violence in the Israel-Hamas conflict. The wording is always difficult. It was a very difficult discussion. And it's not simply formulas. Formulas have a political meaning, but it is our work, I think. One of our missions as a federation, as François very well put it, we were born also with this mission to be a platform for the development of peace through scientific cooperation. It will not get easier as the conflicts become more complex, more nuanced, and it becomes perhaps more difficult for our positions, which, as Father Rubens said, are always different according to the contexts under which our universities operate. And the perception of a conflict on one area of the globe may be very different on another. As a federation, our work is also to negotiate the wording, negotiate the language, but to have a very clear position because we are inspired by values that are common. The defense of human dignity, no matter how this can, no matter the conditions under which this our fellow humans are being are under duress and being victims to violence. That is clearly one of our purposes. And on the issue of colonialism, I wanted to draw attention to one very important document of the Dicastery for Culture and Education, and of the Dicastery for Integral Human Development, issued in March of last year, on the denunciation of the theory of discovery. So a clear element denouncing colonialism and asserting the rights of autochthonous peoples to their lands, their wisdoms, and their modes of organizing themselves in human societies, and also correcting the vision that the Church ever considered that the discovery of the New World was, or the exploration of the New World by the European powers was supported in the teachings of the gospel. It's a very important declaration that many of us perhaps are not aware of, and that I would like to underline here, this declaration of the two joint dicasteries.
Thanks a lot, Lisa. Yes, absolutely. Wording those manifestos was really complicated, but it's as part of a certain job.